Private equity firms now control $8.2 trillion in assets. That's bigger than Japan, Germany, and the UK's economies combined. They're the largest landlord in America, the largest hospital owner in Britain, and quietly, the largest employer class in the developed world. And the data from the last 20 years shows exactly what they've been doing with that power. Extracting, not building. Start here. After 2008, capital didn't rebuild the economy. It fled into finance. Look at domestic credit to the private sector as a share of GDP. In the US, it climbed past 190%. In the UK, past 130%. In the Netherlands, over 200%. These aren't numbers about factories or wages. This is leverage. Money borrowed to buy existing assets. Apartments, hospitals, nursing homes, dental chains, veterinary clinics. Germany and Japan, which kept tighter financial regulations, sit dramatically lower. This is the fingerprint of financialization. Every country that deregulated its financial sector after the 90s saw this line rocket. Every country that didn't flatlined. Remember this shape. You're about to see it repeat. Now the defense you'll hear from every PE spokesperson: we bring efficiency, we cut costs. Fine. Let's test it. If PE actually made things more efficient, healthcare spending should fall, or at least stabilize, in the countries with the most PE penetration. Instead, the opposite. U.S. healthcare spending is now 17.4% of GDP. Nowhere else on Earth is close. The UK, where PE bought up hundreds of care homes and GP practices, saw its share climb from 6.9% to over 11%. Germany and Japan, again, less PE penetration, grew slowly and predictably. The efficiency story is a lie. PE roll-ups don't lower costs. They consolidate pricing power, then extract. When a private equity firm buys a hospital chain, the average procedure cost goes up 20%. Staff gets cut. Prices don't. But inflation is global, they'll say. Everyone's dealing with it. No, inflation hit the financialized economies harder and stuck longer. The US, UK, and Netherlands, the three biggest PE playgrounds, all saw inflation spikes above 8% in 2022. Japan barely broke 3%. France stayed under 6%. And here's what the top-line number hides. Shelter and healthcare drove the difference. In the US, rent alone accounted for over 40% of core inflation in 2023. Rent doesn't rise because of supply chains. Rent rises when a handful of institutional landlords own enough units to set the market. Invitation Homes, Blackstone, Progress Residential. These firms bought hundreds of thousands of single-family homes after 2010. Now they algorithmically coordinate pricing. That's not a market. That's a cartel with software. Where does all this extracted money go? Not to workers, not to consumers, straight to the top. The Gini index measures inequality, and the pattern is brutal. The U.S. Gini sits around 41, closer to Mexico than to its European peers. The UK jumped from 32 in the 90s to 35 today. Meanwhile, France and the Netherlands, with stronger labor protections and tighter capital rules, held their inequality nearly flat. This isn't about talent or innovation. When PE buys a company, average worker wages drop by roughly 2% within 2 years, while executive and investor payouts spike. Multiply that across thousands of acquisitions. This is the mechanism. Wealth doesn't trickle. It gets pumped upward through leveraged buyouts. Here's the number that ties it all together. Household consumption as a share of GDP. This is you, spending on things you actually want. In a healthy economy, it should stay stable or grow. Instead, in the financialized economies, it's falling. Not because people spend less, because rent, healthcare premiums, insurance, and debt service eat everything before you get to choose. In Germany and France, households still direct over 52% of GDP toward real consumption. In the US, discretionary spending shrinks every year as fixed extraction costs climb. You're not broke because you buy too much coffee. You're broke because your landlord is a hedge fund, your hospital is a portfolio company, and your employer just got acquired by a firm whose only mandate is to sell you off in 5 years for a multiple. So, here's the verdict. Private equity is not an investor class. It is an extractor class. The data across 8 developed economies over 23 years tells one story. Wherever finance was deregulated, PE moved in, bought the essentials, housing, healthcare, labor, and pulled the cash out. Rents rose, health costs exploded, inequality widened, household spending got squeezed. And the countries that resisted, Germany, Japan, France, didn't stagnate. They stayed livable. This isn't a debate about capitalism versus socialism. It's a debate about whether $8.2 trillion in leveraged capital should be allowed to own the ground under your feet and the hospital that saves your life. The data says no. If you want more videos that trace the money instead of repeating the talking points, subscribe. We build every argument from public data. No vibes, no punditry, just what the charts actually show. New investigation every week.